This episode of the Cult Popture podcast was brought to you by our Patreon. If you want to tell us which films we should watch, get up to 2 extra exclusive podcasts a month, give us something to talk about in the post-credit scene at the end of each episode, or join us for our monthly movie club Zoom call where we discuss a film together, then please consider joining the cult and donating at www.patreon.com/cultpopture.
Hey Richard, do you want to hear my Don Vito Corleone impression?
Okay.
I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. How's that for a payoff to
Very
a joke
good.
from...
What a callback.
That was like, how long ago was that episode? That was like 3 months ago we did Terminator. Good stuff.
Yeah.
We reward our eagle-eyed viewers or listeners. Eagle-eared?
Yeah.
Do eagles...
Do eagles have particularly good hearing?
Are they known for that? I hope so, because that's what the implication
Otherwise, you're
is.
going to look like a fool.
Well, I would hate for that.
Yeah.
So anyway, hello everybody. My name is AJ and this is Richard, and welcome to Film Franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture podcast, where every fortnight we watch an entire series of movies and then we come together to discuss, to look over, to reflect on their cultural impact, to talk about our own personal experiences with them, to talk about how they fit into the wider story of film franchises, and what we can learn. If we were ever to make
what we
a film
can learn
franchise.
from each other and what we can learn about ourselves.
Exactly. And this franchise, this fortnight, guys, we got a big one. We caught a big fish, and that is, of course, the Godfather Trilogy. It's such a good theme song. It's so good. It like conveys the tragedy of everything. It's like one of the most like musically descriptive tracks I've ever heard. So the Godfather Trilogy is a series of films directed by Francis Ford. You say it.
Coppola.
We're going with Coppola? Okay.
How would you say it?
I flick back
Capiola.
and forth. I flick back and forth between Coppola and Coppola, and I've heard both. So,
What I always do when I get into a situation like this is I look up an interview with the person and I see how they're introduced. Let me have a look.
Okay.
Interview. Oh, just that one just started with him talking.
I got Coppola on my official pronunciation video that I just watched.
Yeah.
All right.
Coppola.
Let's start again. The Godfather Trilogy is a series of films directed by Francis Ford Coppola based on the novel by Mario Puzo, which I believe is how you pronounce his name.
Which I believe is cultural appropriation.
Let's go. Puzo also co-wrote the screenplays for the films with Coppola. The films consist of The Godfather in 1972, The Godfather Part 2 in 1974, and The Godfather Part 3 in 1990. This is probably the biggest collection of pop cultural influences, lines of dialogue, and generic shorthands you'll find this side of the 20th century. The Godfather Trilogy boasts some of the best performances of all time, the best screenplays of all time, and best films of all time. And while we've covered some pretty culturally significant films on this podcast, there's a good argument that none of them are quite as important or influential as The Godfather or its sequels. Would you agree?
No.
What would you say is our
carry
most
on.
culturally significant? You're like, man, Bigger, Fatter, Liar was weird. Like that defined.
That big fucking head. I don't know. Like, I think because Star Wars was around the same time, and I definitely think that had a similar level of influence. Maybe not prestige, but
we haven't covered Star Wars on the podcast though.
No,
And I think I watched a video years ago that sort of signified Star Wars as when auteur Hollywood stopped making complex character pieces and just went, Well, let's do special effects. Like before Star Wars, it's like The Godfather and Scarface and Taxi Driver, and now it's like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and all the big booming blockbusters. So yeah,
Well, there's 1980 is kind of considered the end of auteur cinema,
right.
because Michael Cimino, who had directed The Deer Hunter in 1978, followed that up with a film called Heaven's Gate, which is one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. And it was like, maybe we shouldn't just give directors a lot of money because they're good directors. And that was when, that kind of thing wasn't given. They weren't given those big budgets anymore because of Heaven's Gate. Also, I just thought as well, Jaws is probably a similar level of being a collection of just the first film, but it's a collection of like things that will live on, like lines of dialogue, performances, and moments.
Yeah, that's true. Michael Cimino is going to come up again in this podcast. Isn't that cool? What a cool little seed to plant at the beginning, because we'll be talking about him towards the end. So the first video. Technically, a film is a video. What is a film if not a video? The first film we watched was The Godfather in 1972, as I said, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. What do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
100%.
It is 98%, so that's essentially 100%. It may as well be 100%, And what is The Godfather about?
Okay, so you've got this guy, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's about the Corleone crime family, one of the crime families of New York, and it's about the patriarch of that family, Vito Corleone, played by Marlon Brando, and possibly one of the most famous film roles of all time. There's an attempt made on his life, and so his son Michael ends up having to kind of be the head of the Don family, and so it's a bit about his rise. The whole the arc of the entire series is the rise and fall of Michael Corleone.
Very much so. And there's a Shakespearean Greek tragedy to Michael Corleone, because he begins the film as the only member of the Corleone family who doesn't want a part of the criminal lifestyle. He is a decorated war veteran from World War II, played by Al Pacino, and the first film sort of shows the transformation of Michael from reluctant family outsider to the new head of the last remaining crime family in New York, because he fucking kills them all at the end. Spoilers for all of these movies.
But yeah, so meanwhile, there's Vito has a few children, so obviously the film famously starts on the day of his daughter's wedding. And then he's got Sonny, who is the
James
oldest
Caan.
one, James Caan, and he's like the hot head of the family.
Yeah.
And then there's Fredo, who ends up being the betrayer of the family.
Yes, and Michael and Connie, the youngest daughter, or the only daughter. So, Richard, feels like a bit of an arbitrary question to ask any film nerd worth his salt, which I know you very much are, but what did you think of The Godfather? Had you seen it before?
I had seen it before, not for a long, long time. It was the only one I'd seen, so and I know you're in the same boat, right?
Yes, I'd only seen the first one.
Yeah. It was very fun. My experience with the film, you ask. Well, let me tell you. So I watched this film years ago, and it's obviously it's one of those movies that just through osmosis you end up knowing a lot about, and you end up all these lines of dialogue and these moments, and you've seen scenes from it plenty of times. But it was funny the amount of stuff that especially in The Simpsons that I didn't realize was a reference to The Godfather, or things that you're I assume this is a reference to something, but I don't know what it is. And then you're watching, you're but stuff that I didn't even realize was supposed to be a reference to something. There's the episode of The Simpsons where Marge gets really buff, and she beats up because she gets attacked by someone. She ends up getting buff and then ends up beating up her attacker. And it's literally done like shot for shot, beat for beat, the way Sonny beats up Connie's husband.
Right.
And it's like, why did this need to be referenced to something? You know, like it's just a fight scene, but they like just lifted it from The Godfather.
A lot of mafia imagery as well is like actually imagery from The Godfather, and not, you know, when you see like Fat Tony in The Simpsons is a pretty direct
voiced by The Godfather 3's Joe Montana.
That's true. But yeah, he's very much like a caricature of the gangster types that you see in the Godfather films. And it's hard to know when is it just what the mafia actually is, and when is it just what the Godfather. The Godfather is to mafia what Jurassic Park is to dinosaurs. Like, these are now what I think of when I think of dinosaurs. These are now what we think of when we think of
even though it might
mafia.
not be scientifically accurate to mafiosos.
Yeah. Do you know that mafia gangsters actually had feathers?
But to answer your question, vis-a-vis, did I like the film? Yes, I did. It's a very good film.
It's very good.
And I think, I mean, it's hard to talk about without just barreling straight into what I thought of the second one as well. But I think it's like, you talked about this on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, how it's like, and I've been thinking about it a bit, that it's like, it's kind of a passive watch film.
Yeah.
You whereas the second one's a bit more active, like you have to pay a bit more attention and work a little bit more to put things together. Whereas this is like, the way you described it for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is that you could put it on, fall asleep for 20 minutes, wake back up, and you would, you know, you're not going to be lost. But in a good way. It's like, because the whole thing is fantastic start to finish. And so, yeah, I think it's good.
It's good. Is it one of the best accomplishes of American pop culture?
Probably.
Avengers Endgame was pretty good, dude. I don't know. So I had seen this movie twice when I was a teenager. The first time I watched it was in Year 12 Media Studies at high school, when you do a genre study as part of the Media Studies curriculum, and the genre my teacher picked was crime. And so we watched a lot of crime movies, which was a genre I found very hard to follow. So I really only ever understood The Godfather in broad strokes, right? I understood it was about a mafia family and that Michael Corleone goes from innocent to corrupted by the end. That's about all I retained.
He turns from Mr. Chips into Scarface.
Pretty
Literally,
much.
he's fucking Al Pacino.
Yeah. And that was about it. I would have never said I didn't like it, but I absolutely didn't see how it could be considered the best movie ever made.
Right, yeah, because it strikes me as the kind of thing that you would have watched, and you would have been in an age where you're like, I'm gonna not like The Godfather, like that'll be my thing.
No, there's a window where you do that. Like Lord of the Rings, I was like, I'm gonna not like Lord of the Rings.
And like Paddington 2.
Yeah, well, I don't not like Paddington 2. I just don't think it's the best cinematic achievement of all time. But The Godfather's like one of those, like, because I was a burgeoning film buff, like I was slowly cultivating my identity around being someone who's really into films. The Godfather's one of those things where it's like, no, I actually really want to like it, but I just didn't quite understand. I think I watched it again.
Even if you don't like it, you shouldn't admit to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I watched it again on Blu-ray maybe a year later on my old tube TV in my room, and it was black and white because the TV couldn't handle the like high resolution of Blu-ray, so it went black and white. I don't know if that's a thing. I've never talked about this with someone. It was just something I assumed was because it was Blu-ray.
That's really weird.
So I didn't really see the appeal, but I do definitely. What?
You watch it like in shitty, like black and white. You're like, I do not see the appeal of this film. It is not, like, where's the color?
I didn't understand it, I think, is ultimately what I'm saying. Like, I understood, as I said, I understood in broad strokes, but the minutiae and the nuances went over my head. But watching it as a grown-up dude, my God, the storytelling is so complex, it's so subtle, and all the other pretentious words that you hear film historians frequently use when describing the film. I rewardingly watched the film very closely this time round, which I'm very proud of because I was actually able to, I had my phone down. I wasn't like talking to someone at the same time, and so I understood, the majority of the film perfectly, and felt very rewarded by the story it's told me.
This is one of those movies that, and I get this. Maybe this is just how I watch movies, but I can understand what's going on. But if you came up and you were like, "What's happening in this scene?" I don't know that I'd be able to tell you,
Right?
For like whatever given scene. And it's like maybe I just need, but then it's like once the movie's finished and they're like, "Oh, why did they do this?" I can explain it to you, but while it's happening, maybe it's just like I can't pause my brain out of the scene, like out of paying attention to think about how I got here.
Yeah.
But once it's finished, I'm like, that's how it all wraps up. Yeah.
The one thing I did do was when they mentioned a character name, I Googled the name to make sure I knew which one it was. And it was the fat dude who's real nervous to meet with Don Corleone, who then gets killed when he goes to pretend to betray him for the whatever you call it family. I couldn't remember. I couldn't place the name to the face. No, it's not Carponzio. It's the guy. They're like, it means he sleeps with the fishes because they give him a bulletproof vest with
it's not fishes. Luca Brazzi sleeps with the fishes. Yeah. So I looked up who Luca Brazzi was just to make sure that and it was who I thought it was. So other than that, my pathetic millennial retention was able to actually do the film an honor, and it gave me a lot back. The performances in this film are unmatched. God, this is a collection of some of the best acting performances you'll see. I really loved Marlon Brando in it. I really loved Al Pacino in it. I really loved Robert Duvall, who's kind of the unsung hero of the first two films. Consigliere.
They're sort of like their lawyer.
Yeah, they're and he's kind of their right hand man, but
and also adopted brother technically as well.
He's great. It's funny. It's one of those things like, Brando is just real good in it, but I like. For me, it's like you kind of expect Marlon Brando to cast this shadow over the entire film that is gonna like make no one else be able to kind of like get. But my God, Al Pacino in 1 and 2 is so good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, I mean, we'll talk about. I think it's better to maybe talk about this when we get to the third film, because it's what's so good about the first film is highlighted by what's wrong with the third film.
It's funny how several times already we've been like, the first two films especially, like when talking about something, and it's like, if you have no knowledge of like kind of the legacy of The Godfather, you'd be like, isn't this a trilogy? They haven't mentioned the third film. We'll get to it. So this film was to Marlon Brando what Pulp Fiction was to John Travolta. It revitalized a dying career. And Brando...
A dying Brando.
Huh?
Revitalized a dying Marlon Brando. He's on his deathbed. They're like, do you want to play a mafia boss? And he's like, yeah.
Brando would go on to star in more timeless classics after The Godfather, such as Apocalypse Now and Superman. So he was not the most active or seriously taken actor by the time The Godfather came out. Like, he had his heyday with like On the Waterfront and stuff.
And Streetcar.
Yeah. So Puzo, who's the author of the book, was the first to show interest in having Marlon Brando portray Don Vito Corleone. He sent a letter to Brando in which he stated that he was the only actor who can play the Godfather. A few other actors were considered for Vito, including George C. Scott, Richard Conte, Anthony Quinn, Orson Welles, but in the end, it came down to either Brando or Ernest Borgnine. the Mermaid Man from SpongeBob, which I'm sure he has some prestigious role I'm not aware of.
Yeah, I'm sure he has a lot more range than that.
But can you imagine if these roles were swapped and Marlon Brando ended up playing Mermaid Man and SpongeBob? But even so, like, Ernest Borgnine is an actor I think I've only ever seen in comedies, like playing comedic.
Yeah,
and that voice, imagine that voice saying all the iconic Godfather lines, which we were talking before we started recording. This is one of those classic cases of a misnomer Is that the right term for a poorly, like a line that people think is from this film that's not exactly what they think it is? Because people often quote The Godfather by saying, "You come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding," whereas I believe the line is something like, "You come here the day my daughter is to be married and ask me to commit murder," or something like that. I probably got it wrong as well, but it's nowhere near as succinct as people who quote the movie seem to think it is.
There's a lot of good lines in this film.
Yep.
Like when he's like, how you say, look how they massacred my boy.
That's me, Don Corleone. Here we go. When Michael exits the bathroom to kill the other mob boss and the crooked cop, he's like, "Here we go." Very fun. You and I are both part of a Simpsons shitposting group on Facebook where people post Simpsons shitposting, and there's a real funny movement of people who really don't understand what racism is, trying to say that like the Italian impressions are just as offensive as like a white man voicing Apu for so long. And then someone posted a meme that was like, "Don't make me tap the side." And it was this picture of this Italian guy that said, "Doing an Italian accent is never racist. You can always do it." It's like, yes, exactly. So fucking annoying. Anyway, all right, Richard, now it's time for famous trivia and anecdotes you probably already heard about Marlon Brando and The Godfather, okay?
Are we going to be doing this segment on every episode now?
No, we are not, but this is... The segment is not famous. The trivia in the segment is famous.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the cat held by Marlon Brando in the opening scene, famously while he's like petting a cat, it was a stray that Coppola found while on Paramount Pictures, the lot where they filmed it, and it was originally not called for in the script. So the cat, which is a very relaxed and willing to be pet cat, is like just kind of splayed out across the whole first scene, and it just was found, which is pretty interesting. Brando.
So that cat probably never saw any royalties from the film.
No, exactly, and more cat erasure in film. Is it not really erasure, but I don't want to say abuse because that makes it sound. I feel like the joke is gone if you say animal abuse. Like, the joke I'm making just becomes reminiscent of real life.
Yeah, and it's taking so long to... Like, I would have just, barreled past it and kept doing these...
Well, there was controversially the horse...
There was actually a barrel on set.
The horse head that the director wakes up with in his bed was an actual horse head. The horse was already dead and was from a dog.
It actually wasn't in the script. It was just a stray horse that they murdered, and the scene actually just called for him to wake up,
start screaming. So Marlon Brando eventually won the role for a commitment to the part by slicking his hair back with shoe polish and putting cotton balls in his cheeks for the audition tape. So that we've got the kind of thing going on with his mouth.
It's quite funny because like it's the same sort of thing that happened with Citizen Kane, where it's like you forget how good like the makeup is because so like in Citizen Kane, it's like he's a like 24, 25-year-old Orson Welles for a lot of the film playing this like fucking fat lard ass like Charles Kane, but then it's like that's Orson Welles became that later in life, and then it's the same thing here. It's like he wasn't like the Brando from Apocalypse Now or whatever, because he famously in Apocalypse Now he was cast as like a more kind of lean. They're supposed to have this big fight scene, but he just showed up to set like bald and like fat as all hell. And so it's like, yeah, if you look at like the before and after makeup of The Godfather, of Vito Corleone, he was still quite handsome, and it was just a few years later that he would descend into madness.
Descend into the heart of darkness that was him in Apocalypse Now. For the actual filming, this surprised me. For the actual filming of his scenes in The Godfather, he didn't have cotton balls in his mouth. He had a mouthpiece made by a dentist, which you can now find on display in the American Museum of Moving Image in Queens, New York.
Oh, wow. Should we go see that?
Yeah, let's do it. Maybe the most famous anecdote.
What a dumbass!
Look, no,
Holy shit!
I think I've accidentally discovered something great there. An anecdote? That's adorable. It's like not quite as significant as an anecdote. An anecdote.
It's the factoid.
Yeah.
Anecdote's fact. Although factoid actually means a fact that's not confirmed.
Oh, really?
It actually has a different.
What about a funecdote?
That's a fun fact. Anecdote's better.
Okay, well, the most famous anecdote is that he was extremely lazy and aloof on set, needing to read his lines off cue cards hidden around the set, that sort of thing, which is incredible because, again, he's so fucking good in this movie.
Imagine being like that good at your job that you can like fuck it. You don't have to try. And everyone's like, yeah, it's Brando. Like
it's literally the defining performance of your career, and you couldn't be bothered.
It's the defining performance of cinema.
But yeah, it sounds like with all these stories that Marlon Brando sounds like he's pretty difficult to work with, and I've got a couple more anecdotes later that
especially if you look into like Last Tango in Paris and stuff,
right? Yeah,
very and Apocalypse Now, like,
and it's sort of this. It is that ultimate case where it's like, listen, you put up with it, you're probably going to get an Oscar-worthy performance in your film, you know?
And which is what I'm sure Richard Stanley thought when he directed The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Right.
And that it was so bad that he didn't direct another film for like almost 30 years.
Wow. So speaking of the Oscars, at the 45th Academy Awards, The Godfather won Oscars for Best Picture, Best Actor for Marlon Brando, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Puzo and Coppola. In addition, the 7 other Oscar nominations included Pacino, Caan, and Duvall for Best Supporting Actor. So 3 Best Supporting Actor noms from one movie, which is pretty uncommon, I think. Does that happen too often nowadays?
It happens all the time, actually.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah, it happens every year.
Well, never mind.
You often get 1 or 2 from.
Yeah, I know. That's why I said 3.
I know.
Coppola was also nominated for Best Director. This is one of those interesting categorizations of nominations to me, because would you say Brando is the lead actor in the film?
It's one of those things. It's like he's the title character, so
yeah,
you can understand.
Well, would you
why.
say
and it's like, and I also think you have to keep in mind that it's not the Academy hasn't watched the film, but like, well, he's the lead. Let's nominate him. The studio puts him forward, and it's probably that Marlon Brando, because he hadn't won an Oscar up until this point, had he?
I don't think so.
That he, it's like you wants to get his Oscar for lead actor rather than
Well, because Pacino was nominated for supporting, and while Vito has more of a presence, the film is undoubtedly about Michael. Yeah, and Al Pacino actually boycotted the ceremony because he was angry that he wasn't nominated.
Sorry, Brando won for On the Waterfront as well.
I thought that might have. Yeah, true. Yeah. Pacino was angry that he was nominated for supporting actor when he had more screen time than Marlon Brando and is the lead character in the film. And I can understand nominating Brando for lead actor, but nominating Pacino for supporting actor feels a bit misguided.
Right, but I mean, yeah, like you have to nominate, because if you nominated both for lead actor, you've split the vote. And only one of them can win as well. But I think also as well that like by definition you like have to pick a lead actor and a lead actress for your film. You can't pick 2, whereas like supporting, it's like everyone else is a supporting character. It was similar.
It was similar with The Favourite when Rachel Weisz was it was
Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz were nominated for supporting, and Olivia Colman won for lead. And it's like, is Olivia Colman the lead in the Favourite? I would have thought Emma Stone was the lead in The Favourite. It's a lot more vague. Like it's definitely like Emma Stone's story, but the film is about Olivia Colman.
It's an interesting conversation, isn't it? Like what are these terms?
But
actually
it's like
mean?
I think at the end of the day, it's what the studio told the Academy they were doing.
Yeah.
But I assume you're about to tell the story about Marlon Brando's Oscar.
I'm actually not. Would you like to take that?
Well, he famously refused his Oscar for The Godfather, and had a young Native American girl go on stage to collect for him, and yeah, he Sachin Littlefeather was her name, and yeah, it was essentially he boycotted the Oscars to highlight the treatment of Native American people in Hollywood, and got booed for it. She was booed.
That is a bad look, Hollywood.
Yeah, it's it's interesting.
Well, hey, I thought it could be cool too. Godfather, greatest film of all time, in theory. Look at what Roger Ebert said for each of the Godfather films, being the greatest film critic of all time, or very much the Godfather of film critics anyway. And surprisingly, Roger Ebert actually criticized Brando's performance and called it, saying his movements lacked precision and his voice was wheezy. And it's like, whenever I read like an interesting factoid, or no, fact about an anecdote about Roger Ebert, it's always him saying like an opinion that would now be culturally considered not the dominant
culturally
opinion.
Insensitive.
Yeah, not at all. But like, you know, like he didn't like The Matrix. He's criticized Brando. He will see what he said about Godfather 2 in a minute.
Yeah, he thought Stephanie Meyer's The Host was so bad that he just died after reviewing it.
But he did later sort of, you know, put it in like his greatest films of all time.
Yeah, I know, because I know he gave Godfather 2 not a very good review, which I'm sure I'm stepping on your toes a little bit there, but he did review it years later.
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. One scene that really impacted me in The Godfather, Richard, was when Michael goes to see Vito in the hospital after Vito is gunned down for refusing the narcotics deal from Sollozzo. And in the film, Michael turns up to the hospital and there's no one around, and it's like, well, this is a high-profile gangster. He's probably going to get killed. And so a nurse comes in and he's like, where are all the guards? And they're like, oh, we sent them home. And he's like, someone's coming to kill my father. You have to help me move this bed. And immediately I just related to the nurse. I was like, if I was in this film, I would be the nurse, and I'd be like, hey, this really isn't my call to help you move the bed. I can go and get someone, dude. Let me go. And he'd be like, no, just help me move the bed. I'd be like, I don't usually work at this hospital, and like, it's not, I'm really not the person you're wanting to be talking to about this. That shit happens to me all the time at jobs. It's like, I get asked to make like big important calls, and I'm like, I can go get someone. I will happily go get someone.
Yeah. Speaking of good scenes, when Michael has to go kill the what a good scene.
It's the best scene in the film. It's the best scene in the franchise, I dare I say.
Which probably makes it the best scene in all of cinema.
Right, so Michael has to kill Sollozzo and McCluskey, who is the kind of crime boss.
He's an NYPD.
Yeah, well, McCluskey's a crooked cop, and Sollozzo is the guy who shot Vito for not complying to his deal. And he shoots him in a restaurant, and the tension leading up to that moment is fucking palpable. It is insane. I felt like I was watching Breaking Bad. You know, like it's the same language of tension.
The Godfather are like, oh my god, like thank God we finally got compared to. Like...
Well, that's the thing. It's a pretty cool like retroactive respect I have for this film, as scenes like that mean like it clearly influenced the golden age of TV dramas and like Tarantino and Scorsese films.
Yeah, well, I mean, because the golden age of TV drama was started by The Sopranos.
Exactly, but yeah, like it's such a scene. It's such a Breaking Bad-esque scene, and I really enjoyed
100%. So yeah, like it starts with, because they organize it beforehand that they're like, you can't take a gun in. We'll plant the gun beforehand, so it's like talk to them for however long, then excuse yourself to go to the bathroom, and we'll have taped a gun behind the like the water tank of the toilet, and then it's like, yeah, they like insult him or something, and that's when he goes up and gets it, but he like can't find the gun immediately, and it's like fuck, but then it's just there. He just had to look a little bit harder. But then he comes out, because they're like,
come out blasting.
The plan is come out blasting, drop the gun immediately, and just get out of there. Like people will be too scared.
Yeah,
They won't look at you. stuff like that. But he comes out and he sits back down, and the camera just slowly zooms in on him, and you can see him like coming to grips with the fact that it's like his life is about to change, like completely, and it can never go back.
Yeah. It's cinema. It is cinema. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. And the other specific sort of scene I wanted to mention is the final shot of the film, which is like one of the classiest pieces of storytelling I could name you, right? So it ends with Kay, played by Diane Keaton, who's Keating, right? Keaton. Okay, and she plays Kay, who's Michael's girlfriend and second wife eventually, and she's basically like, did you kill Carlo, who is the one of the traitors in the family towards the end of the film, and he's like, never ask me about the family business, and she's like, you said you weren't like your father, all this sort of thing, and he's like, all right,
like, Mamma Mia.
He's like, Mamma Mia, yeah, and then he's like, okay, you can ask me about the family business this one time, and she's like, did you do it? And he said no. And she's like, okay, thank God. And she goes out to like get something, and then she looks back into the room, the office, and sees like all these men come up and like pay their respects to the new Don Corleone, and then someone like closes the door on Kay, and it's like, motherfucker, like, it's it. He's the Godfather. He's the Godfather.
Yeah,
he's so
the guy. He's the titular Godfather.
And that's why he should have been nominated for lead actor. Oh, what an ending. I think I've seen it parodied in like Family Guy or something, but it's like, it's just so, the language of the scene is so powerful, the like visual language of it, and it's like,
of the shutting a door as your final shot. It's very similar to the final shot of The Irishman as well, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sergio Leone was Paramount's first choice to direct the film. He turned down the option in order to work on his own gangster film, Once Upon a Time in America. I did read something that said he didn't want to make a film glorifying the mafia, and then after he saw The Godfather, it was like a massive regret of his that he didn't direct it. Because The Godfather is also seen as a bit more complex than just being pro-mafia. It's actually seen as quite a pro-immigrant film. Like, it's like the story of the immigrant's American dream in a lot of ways, which is really cool. Peter Bogdanovich was then approached, but he also declined the offer because he was not interested in the mafia. In addition, Peter Yates, Richard Brooks, Arthur Penn, Costa Garvis, and Otto Preminger were all offered the position and declined. Man, can you imagine if The Godfather was directed by Otto Preminger? It'd be a completely different film. I don't know who Otto Preminger is the joke, if you can't tell. According to IMDb, Lenny Montana, who played Luca Brasi, was so nervous about working with Marlon Brando that in the first take of their scene together, he flubbed some lines, which happens in the character in the film, but it was actually just the actor screwing up. And so the scene where before that, where you see him practicing his thank you to The Godfather, was added later so that they could use the scene where the actor screws up the lines because he's so intimidated by Marlon Brando, because he's like, I wanted to thank you for allowing me here on the day of your daughter's wedding, on the day that she is to be married. And it's like, it's like a double positive or whatever. And it's like, it works. It really works.
It's interesting because that's the thing that like, Marlon Brando kind of, started the kind of movement or like pioneered it of like the Stanislavski acting technique, which is just like being your character kind of thing. So it doesn't matter if people screw up, you just stay in character. And there's a bit in On the Waterfront where they're walking through like a playground. He's talking to the female lead, and she pulls these gloves out of her pocket and drops one by accident, and Marlon Brando just picks it up and starts like pulling the fingers back out of it, and kind of just like uses it while he's sort of talking contemplatively. And the actress, like, you can see her panic, and you can see her like she tries to get it back off him, but and then he goes off and does something with it, and it's like he's not allowing himself, the character, to be interrupted by something going wrong. And there's There's an example of this in the third film, which is like a very minute thing I noticed. But there's a famously bad performance in the third film, which I'm sure we'll talk about more. Sofia Coppola. But there's a bit where she's like rolling up a poster, and you can see there's like a bit where there's like clearly a kink in the in the paper, and so she has to straighten it out. But you can see her mind exit the scene to fix it and then start being the character again.
That's a real cool observation.
It's like it's like the most minute detail, but it's like that's kind of the thing that Brando kind of pioneered, this thing of never allowing yourself to have those moments because something's wrong. How would my character react? Because I'm just living the character, you know?
Yeah. Nice. Very cool. So sorry. I know I say that when it sounds like
I was just about to cool. Anyway.
No, that was genuinely a very cool anecdote. And I'm very glad you brought it up. Can I move on to my next thing, or will I be ruthlessly mocked for
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. If you can come up with a better segue, it wouldn't go awry.
All right. Well, Richard, I thought I would look into some. So I sort of like perused the critic contemporary reviews, and I found one which I think would be a good place to sort of wrap up talking about the first film on. And this is remarking. This is actually isn't. This is the 40th anniversary, so not contemporary. But film critic John Podhoretz praised The Godfather as arguably the great American work of popular art and the summer of all great movie making before it. And I think that's a great way to summarize why this is such a revered piece of film, you know?
Yeah, I think as well, because you look back at films like I mentioned Citizen Kane, where it's like, not only is it a great film, but you look at what it pioneered and what it like I guess really what it pioneered, and then you look at the next however many years of films leading up to The Godfather, and it's like they perfected all of those techniques and everything that was introduced in film between the start of film and The Godfather. It's like they using all of those techniques, and it's almost like the closing chapter of one era of film that allowed us to have the next one.
Yeah, exactly. But before we move on to The Godfather Part 2, I've got some dumb IMDb trivia for the first film. Only a couple. I've got way more for the next two. But so yeah, IMDb trivia, if you don't know, is user submitted, meaning a lot of it is either dumb or arbitrary, or occasionally I include it because the trivia itself is not dumb, but the situation it's talking about is like, this is stupid that this happened. Which is actually technically a good piece of trivia then. But so I've got two pieces of dumb IMDb trivia for The Godfather. According to Al Pacino, the tears in Marlon Brando's eyes were real in the hospital scene when Michael pledges himself to his father. And it's like, yeah, it's a fucking actor. It's Brando. Of course the tears are real. Why are we even talking about the tears are real? It's like the first thing you learn as like a professional actor. And the second piece I've got is Francis Ford Coppola held improvisational rehearsal sessions that simply consisted of the main cast sitting down in character for a family meal. The actors and actresses couldn't break character, which Coppola saw as a way for the cast to organically establish the family roles in the final film. Now, that is cool. That is not a dumb thing that happened, but it sounds like something I would hate to be involved in.
Oh my fucking god, dude! I know. Like this is one of those things that like I'm okay. Not to toot my horn, I'm quite good at these things, but I don't like doing them.
Right.
Like I've done exercises like this.
You are trained as an actor as well.
Yeah, and it's like I not that you could tell by watching Ready to Record, but I find it quite easy to improvise and stay in character and stuff like that. There's because improvising a scene is different from like like comedy troupe improv, where it's like you're trying to think of how to make things funny. But if you just know a character and you're thinking what would they say and how would they say it, that's like not. I don't find that very difficult, but it makes me uncomfortable to do.
It makes me so uncomfortable, and I would forever be uncomfortable with it. I'd feel like I constantly would have to say something to express that I'm in character, you know?
Well, acting is reacting.
But I would feel like if everyone else is talking and I'd be like, oh God, I have to think of something in character to say. Like, put a camera on me, I could probably do it. It's the fact that it's for no one is the problem. That's what I'm struggling with, right?
Yeah, I guess if you think about it, like, you not only is it helping you find the character a bit better, but it's also, because acting is reacting once again, like you're fostering better performances from the other people.
Sure, yeah. I remember in high school drama, I was all good with like exercises and stuff, but whenever there was like, okay, go away by yourself and practice this, I'd be like, I don't want to do this. No one's watching me.
Fuck yeah. I would just go and just sit by myself and then come back and just do it the same I would have done it.
It was awful stuff. All right, The Godfather Part 2 in 1974. Francis Ford Coppola directed. What do you think it has on Rotten Tomatoes?
100%.
Is 98%, the same as the first. It received divided reviews from critics at the time, but its reputation was improved rapidly and soon became maybe the biggest ever case of a critical reevaluation in history. like the praise and the kind of social standing that The Godfather 2 has now is like insane to think that it was ever doubted, you know, because it's now seen as sort of just as good as the first one. What is The Godfather Part 2 about?
Okay, so following on from where we last left our heroes, so this is all about, this is where the kind of overall plot of this film in the present day timeline is that it's kind of the Fredo's betrayal and his kind of whatnot, his wrongdoings. It's kind of that coming to a boiling point, and as Michael really starts to grow his power as a mafia boss, and then essentially has to make the decision to get rid of Fredo.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, decades earlier, we see a young Vito Corleone, played by Robert De Niro,
mm-hmm.
And it's kind of his rise a little bit. And so he immigrates to New York, and then he ends up back in Sicily and kind of fulfills his childhood dream of murdering an old man.
the man who killed his mother and father and brother. Yeah,
a specific old man, not just, he's like, ever since I was, as far back as I could remember, I always wanted to kill an old man.
So it's interesting, the first film, I don't know if you picked up on this, it actually takes place over 10 years, the first film. It takes place from 1945 to 1955. The Godfather Part 2 takes place in 1958 and 18 or something like that.
17, 18.
Mostly. So yeah, there's a bit more, there's a big section in it that's about like making deals with the Cuban government and that sort of thing. I watched a real cool video from Eyebrow Cinema, the YouTuber, who described it as if part 1 is about how an innocent man becomes a head of a mob family, part 2 is about how the head of a mob family becomes a monster. And I was like, that's kind of a cool way to think of it. So you hadn't seen this film before?
No, I hadn't.
Nor had I. What did you think of it?
It's a good film. It is a good film. It's interesting. This is one of my dad's favorite films.
Oh, cool.
Who I'm sure will be listening to this. Hi, Dad.
Hi, Dad.
But it's interesting. So, I'm trying to think of like what I sort of thought it was going into it, and versus what I got. I kind of thought I would like the flashback bits a bit more. Like, I thought that was like, this is what makes it the best one,
right?
Is because it has like this amazing, like you see both of them, and I think because there are a lot of parallels in the story, but I think it's more just, it's not that I didn't like them, it's just I found the continuation of Michael's story more interesting than seeing Vito's. But this is definitely a film, and like I mentioned about, like it's more of an active watch. Like you kind of have to invest a bit more into it. I do really want to watch this film again. Like maybe within the next month or so. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but there is going to be a reason to rewatch part 1 and 2 coming before the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a great film, and Al Pacino's performance in this is one of the greatest of all time. I think that's fair to say. De Niro's fantastic as well. I not necessarily like trying to do any kind of imitation of Marlon Brando.
He does the voice, but he's also speaking Sicilian for 95% of his lines, so it obscures it a bit. It clouds it a bit, so you're not drawing a direct comparison.
Yeah, it's interesting watching because De Niro and Pacino, obviously, you're told they're two of the greatest actors of all time, and you and I grew up in a world where our introduction to these actors was like Meet the Parents. Yeah. And so it's like, you're like, yeah, he's good in it, but then...
He's great in Meet the Parents.
Oh, yeah, he is. But it's like, you go back and watch these things and it's seen like a completely different thing. And especially Al Pacino, who, and we'll talk about this, but the difference in 1972 and 74 Al Pacino to 1990 Al Pacino is staggering.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was good to see like these performances and be like, yeah, fuck yeah, this is actually like one of the best performances I've ever seen.
Yeah. I really liked part 2. I gun to my head, I'd say I prefer part 1, which is interesting. I'd never seen part 2, but I always thought I'm so in love with the concept of sequels that I'd be champing at the bit to be like, part 2's the best one, but I think I'm more of a Godfather part 1 guy. And that may just be because part 1 feels a lot cleaner, as you said, and like easier to follow.
Yeah, I'm the same, but I think that could change in a rewatch.
Right. I think it's a lot more difficult to read the poetry of part 2 and fully enjoy it. I had to dig into it a bit, and maybe it's just because I hadn't seen it before, but like I very succinctly can tell you the poetry of part 1, that it's the corruption of an innocent man. Whereas like, what is part 2 about? It's like, before watching any videos on it or like looking into it, I'm not sure if I could really tell you. But what I thought was interesting is how like both you and I are like lifelong consumers of media, and I've passively ingested a lot more of part 1 than part 2.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, even though both are as highly regarded and as old as each other, ostensibly, before I'd even seen part 1, I was well aware of like Marlon Brando's character, of several lines of dialogue and iconic imagery. The only thing I knew about part 2 was Robert De Niro plays a young Vito, and I hadn't seen it. I just knew he did. I knew the final shot where Michael's sitting there thinking about what he's done. We posted it on our Instagram. It's sort of like and then Alexander the Great wept for he had no more worlds to conquer kind of thing. And I was something in me was aware of like the idea of Fredo. Like, Fredo's almost a term now for like someone who betrays you. And that doesn't happen in the first one explicitly. And therefore, I think I was expecting something like that to happen with Fredo in this because I'd become aware that was kind of a widely used generic term for a traitor or something like that. And his death is real great because it's earlier in the film he tells Michael's son, Anthony, the key to catching a good fish is to say a Hail Mary before you cast your line. And then his death is when he's out on a fishing boat and he casts his line and he's saying a Hail Mary and gets shot from behind by Al, the bodyguard. And it's like, fuck, what a ghostly piece of film, right? Like, it's a very well shot thing. And I bring it up because that is also, I didn't realize this, but the shot is something I've seen replicated, I think, somewhere in pop culture as well. But I didn't realize it was from anything. The idea of killing someone on a boat in the middle of the water,
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning, you might have had this in your notes, but Fredo's played by John Cazale, who this pops up on Reddit trivia all the fucking time. But he was only ever in 5 films: The Godfather, The Conversation, The Godfather Part 2, Dog Day Afternoon, and The Deer Hunter. All 5 of which were nominated for Best Picture. Yeah,
exactly.
That's pretty, because it's not like I always thought it was like, oh yeah, he'll he'll pop up in each of them, and it'll be just like a little cameo role. It's like, no, he's a very main character in like 2 Best Picture winners.
Yeah, and he's one of those like actors that's like, it's a real good actor, but he plays like such a snively character that your mind almost doesn't go like, oh, he's actually just as good as like Pacino because he's playing a less dominant character. I really liked the prequel stuff with De Niro, but initially I didn't understand why we were being shown it. And you'd hope the quote-unquote greatest sequel of all time would be somewhat narratively justified in showing what could be seen.
The greatest prequel of all time.
Yeah, you'd hope it could be justified in showing what could be seen as meaningless fan service. You know, like, there's got to be a better reason to be showing us this just beyond it's cool. What did why do you think we were shown Vito's rise? What do you think the narrative point of it is?
Yeah, it's the parallels of growing power, and because I think Vito's story is a lot more kind of
positive.
Yeah, it's positive. It's like it's an American dream kind of story. Yeah. It's about something starting, you know, whereas the Michael's thing is about it's something ending.
Yeah.
Essentially. And so I think because of what was shown of Vito at the start of in the first film, you know, it's a very kind of ruthless mafioso boss kind of, don't fuck with this guy. And so seeing him, it's like, yeah, he started out like this too.
Yeah.
Just like Michael.
Yeah, it's just that Vito's life kind of rocked and Michael's life sucked. Right? But because I think, yeah, so it is a contrast, but I think it's also a statement on how it used to be simpler times, right? Because in the good old days. Yeah, the good old days, where in the early 1900s, you'd kill like a lowly don, because that's what Vito does. He kills like the don of his little borough, but it's like he's not even that tough of a don. And suddenly you rule New York, right? Whereas now you're traveling to Havana and making backdoor agreements with a corrupt government. Like, these are the huge discrepancies in how difficult and how complicated both these things are. Yeah. So it is good. It's a bit, as we've said this a few times, I think, already, but it's like The Godfather Part 2 requires a bit more work on your part as an audience member to understand why it's good. So both films end with a montage of Michael's enemies being killed. But the first one is this dark, morally bankrupt victory, right? It's like intercut with Michael baptizing his godson, literally becoming a godfather and being asked if he renounces Satan, and he's like, I do, and then cut to like all the like plethora of murders he's ordered. And
do you know that little baby playing the godson in that scene?
Mm-hmm.
Sophia
Coppola. Yep. The second is very light on music, and we watch as an enemy. This is real interesting. And this is from the Eyebrow Cinema video that I watched. So yeah, the montage happens, and the people you see kill is Roth, who's an enemy who is already lost, right? Like, he is coming back to the States and is going to prison, right? Like, he's lost, but he's killed, right? Then you see the family traitor himself, or kills himself, sorry, who's what's his name? What are these characters' names?
Clemenza?
Something Italian, I don't know. No, it's not Clemenza, it's Frankie. You see Frankie kill himself, and it's like he was a family traitor, but again, he's also no threat at this point, right? And then you see Fredo get killed, who is guilt-ridden, and not only as a member of the family, but he's never going to cross Michael again, right? And so,
'cause he's dead.
Well, yeah, but he was, even if he wasn't being killed, he would never cross him again. And it's the same idea as the montage in the first one, but in the first one, it's glory and it's, I am getting rid of my enemies. But in the second one, it's like this cold emptiness, and it's like, this is just pointless. All of these deaths are pointless. It's not a strategic move to help the family. It's petty revenge at the cost of the family, right? And so it's something Don Vito would never do, and it's something that Michael has become. Right? It's very cool.
I do want to just talk before we move on about you mentioned like the final shot of this film, and so we're shown flashbacks all throughout the film, but the second to last scene of the film is a flashback to only a few years before the start of the first film. And it's the family at dinner minus so Sonny, James Caan returns. Don Vito's not there. But it's when Michael announces that he's, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, he's going to enlist in the Marine Corps. And the whole family is like, what the fuck are you doing? Apart from Fredo, who's like the only one that's like, that's dope, man.
Yo, that is dope, dude.
And then you hear Vito comes to the door and everyone runs out of the room, but Michael sits there by himself, and then it fades, cross dissolves to Michael sitting alone by the lake. And it's like, it's one of those things that, like, obviously it's a fantastic movie up until this point, but it's one of those, like, oh, what a satisfying, like, button on the film. And it's like I've mentioned this about, like, the last half hour of The Irishman, like the second to last shot of A Star Is Born. There's like all these things where it's like, this is so good, but I just need one final tasty little morsel, and then it gives it to you, and it's so satisfying. And it's like, it's the kind of, that final shot of Michael is one of those, like, that's gonna be my memory of the film. That's gonna be the image that stays with me for the rest of my life.
It's the kind of final shot that men write songs about. No, absolutely, it is cool, and it is just so reflective, and it's like,
because it's so like,
piece of shit.
Yeah, was it worth
monster,
it? You fucking dick.
Was it worth it? You piece of shit. I have a favorite line of dialogue of this film, which is when they're talking about killing Roth, even though he'll be like heavily bodyguard. And Michael says, if anything in this life is certain, if history has taught us anything, it's that you can kill anyone. And I was like, fuck yeah, man. That is so dark. Interestingly enough, this story takes place a few years before JFK is killed. So it's like, almost a eerie premonition of that. But speaking of lines of dialogue, Richard, do you know that possibly there's conjecture, and I couldn't find a straight answer, The Godfather 2 is possibly the origin of the phrase, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer?
Interesting. Because the first one has revenge is a dish best served cold as well.
Oh, right.
I don't know if that's where it comes from, but...
Right. But I just thought I would have assumed that was hundreds of years old, that line. Yeah. And there are a few other origins, which means it could be a bit older, but like, it was like rated one of the best film lines in history in something. Right. And it was like, well, surely if it's getting ranked as such, you would think that it's... Yeah. Like, I wouldn't even thought it was a film line. I thought it was just an idiom. So according to IMDb, Francis Ford Coppola considered bringing Marlon Brando back to play Vito Corleone as a young man, convinced he could play at any age. As he worked on the script, though, he remembered that Robert De Niro's exceptional audition for The Godfather and cast him without offering the part to Brando. So Robert De Niro auditioned for a very small role. I can't remember what role it was. It wasn't like a significant one in the first film, and he didn't get it. And so that's actually how he got... that's how he got the role of young Vito. Cool. Are you ready for a long piece of Oscar trivia, which you'll know bits and pieces of, and is so cult popturian? I feel so honoured to be able to bring it to you now on this podcast.
So you think I'm not going to know all of
it? Well, it's more like when you think about it, like you'll know the gist, but then it just keeps going, and there's more caveats to it than I originally thought. Okay. So, the film was nominated for 11 Academy Awards at the 47th Academy Awards and became the first sequel to win Best Picture. Only Lord of the Rings: Return of the King has since also achieved this. The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2 remain the only original/sequel combination to both win Best Picture. Along with The Lord of the Rings, The Godfather Trilogy shares the distinction that all of its installments were nominated for Best Picture.
Which we talked about last week.
Yes, it's 6 Oscar wins, also included Best Director for Coppola, Best Adapted Screenplay for Coppola and Puzo, and Best Supporting Actor for De Niro. The first of 2 times that 2 actors have won an Oscar for their portrayals of the same character. So De Niro and Brando both have won for playing the same character. The second is Heath Ledger and Joaquin Phoenix for the Joker, though it's maybe an important distinction to point out that the 2 Joker performances were in different
And they're not supposed to be the same person.
Exactly, while De Niro and Brando are both playing the same character, the same canon at a different point in his life. However, there are other cases of an actor being nominated for taking over another Oscar-winning performance. Gerard Depardieu was nominated for Best Actor in Cyrano de Bergerac in 1990, a role that had already won an Oscar for Jose Ferrer. And like Brando, Ferrer had played his role in English, and like De Niro, Depardieu played the role in the character's native language, in this case French. Years later, Jeff Bridges would be nominated for his performance in True Grit, which John Wayne had won his only Oscar, for his performance in the original True Grit, which IMDb cutely points out also featured Robert Duvall.
Very nice.
Yeah. So it's a lot more than just like Lord of the Rings and Godfather are the only two trilogies to, or both the only sequels to ever win Best Picture. Yeah. It's like, it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah. And it's crazy. It's like, because there's not many sequels that have been nominated, like, especially without having the original nominated.
Yeah, yeah. Has that ever happened? Do you reckon?
Toy Story 3.
Oh, of course. But tell you what, man, Pacino really got shafted by the Godfather series.
Oh my god, yeah, like literally, you go on like Al Pacino's Wikipedia page, and it says his performance as Michael Corleone is considered one of the best, one of the greatest in film history. But he won his first Oscar in 1993 for Scent of a Woman, and his only Oscar.
Is that his only Oscar? I thought he won for like Dog Day Afternoon. No. Were you serious? That is crazy. Yeah. The Scent of a Woman. That's an apology, Oscar.
It is. It fucking is.
That's a fucking apology.
It's generally,
Oscar.
Yeah. It's one of the classic examples. Scorsese winning for The Departed's another one, and right. Leo for The Revenant, where it's like, look, you deserve one of these.
What should Scorsese have won for?
Raging Bull.
I feel like I like The Departed more than Raging Bull.
Yeah, but it's like, it's Martin Scorsese who's been, making his
tickets up.
Yeah, who's been making some of the best films of, for such a long time. Finally wins in 2006.
Yeah, right. So weird. So Puzo started writing the script for The Godfather 2 in December 1971, before Part 1 was even released, and the initial title was The Death of Michael Corleone, which, as we'll soon learn, is clearly a title that Coppola has a boner for. Like, that is a title that shows up again and again from here on out. Coppola's idea for a sequel would be to juxtapose the ascension of the family under Vito Corleone with the decline of the family under his son Michael. I had always wanted to write a screenplay that told the story of a father and a son at the same age. They were both in their 30s, and I would integrate the two stories. In order not to merely make The Godfather 1 over again, I gave Godfather 2 this double structure by extending the story in both the past and the present. Another interesting piece of trivia is that the rise of Vito is in the Godfather novel, and is not featured in the Godfather film adaptation, and the rise of Vito is the only part of the Godfather novel that is adapted. So The Godfather Part 2, the movie, is technically also based on The Godfather, the novel, but only because of Vito's story.
While we're talking about the flashback stuff as well, there's a scene where Robert De Niro is like holding baby Michael. Mm-hmm. And that was like, this is your Oscar scene, dude. Like, it was, because it's silent. He's just looking. He's holding this young baby that we know is going to grow up to be this fucking monster. And just like the love he looks at him with, it's such a bittersweet but very well acted scene.
I think that's one of my favorite things about these films is how all the gangsters, all these ruthless criminals, how tender they are with their family. It's so sweet. Like it's like so Vito dies in the first film playing with his grandson in an orange, in like a little mini orchard of oranges, and it's just the sweet scene of a granddad and a grandson.
Yeah, it's funny, yeah, because he cuts up an orange wedge to give himself like funny teeth, and then he's like, oh, and it's like, you're just an old man, like yeah. It's funny because he's talking about like not glorifying mafia. Anytime I watch a mafia film, I'm like, fuck yeah, I'd love to have like bros like that, eh? Just looking out for me and like people, But then it's like you're also probably going to get shot in the face at some point.
It's worth reflecting that eventually all these close people in all these mobsters' lives are killed to some degree, to the extent of Michael. Michael's very much the Walter White grenade in the universe, right?
Yeah.
Like something I've realized watching Better Call Saul is how well everything worked before Walter White showed up. Walter White's an actual like a nuclear bomb in the story, and it's the same with Michael. Is like these movies talk on and on and on about how like nothing is more important than family, and with Don Vito you believe it, but Michael kills his brother. You know, like Michael like clearly is not as good as Vito. It's it's good stuff. You know, like it's real sinister. Brando, so that dinner scene flashback you talked about before, Brando was supposed to actually show up. You hear the door open and Don Vito walk in at the end of the scene.
There you go. Hey, it's Don Vito. Come on.
It's Don Vito, yes. But Brando didn't return for the dinner flashback because he didn't like how Paramount treated him. He was supposed to be there but never showed up to set. So they rewrote the scene because Marlon Brando didn't show up. That's how close. So there's so many stories like this from the Godfather movies. Yeah. Like about someone not showing up or things changed at the last moment. And for the first two films, it was serendipitous and worked. And for the third film, it's like, this ruined the movie. James Caan did show up for that flashback. He dies in the first one, so isn't in most of the second film except for this flashback, and he was able to negotiate the same paycheck he got for starring in 2/3 of the entire first film.
That's cool.
So he made fucking bank returning as Sonny. But it's good business, right? For James Caan. It's very savvy because James Caan can read the scene and go, you fucking need me in this scene. This scene is undoable without Sonny in it. You know, you can do it without the Don. You can do it without Vito, but you desperately need Sonny in it. So he's like, give me heaps of money. Do it, you know.
Yeah, there's I just saw the funny story about James Caan being so he's only really in the first one. He pops up in the second one, but in Elf, the Will Ferrell movie, he plays Will Ferrell's his actual dad, right? Or is it or whatever? But apparently everyone was like was terrified of James Caan. And it was like, because, you know, you're working with this like screen icon while you're making this kind of like dumb family movie. And apparently he's been known for being like an actual, like a hilarious dude and stuff like that. But he's older now and he's, but like while working on the film, Will Ferrell, like gave him a box set of The Godfather. And was like left it on his in his trailer with a note being like, "Hey, it's been so great working with you. You should check these out. The first one's pretty slow, but the second two are really good." And then apparently after that, it was like, you know, everyone kind of got along with them.
I was reading a lot about like the prank culture on set of the Godfather films. And how like everyone was like mooning each other, and Marlon Brando was crowned like King of the Moon or something.
I watched the interview with Robert Duvall talked about it on Graham Norton, and he said that there's like while they're filming like the wedding scene, that was when and Coppola was like, guys, like there's so many women and children here, can we just not do it today? And they're like, this is what my butt looks like. But apparently, and because Brando like got a belt made up that was like the king of mooning, and then and Duvall like overheard some woman being like, oh yeah, Duvall was pretty funny, but my God, did you see the balls on Brando? It just has massive balls apparently.
That's hilarious. Cool. So, going back to talking about who was and who wasn't returning for the second one, the character of Frank Pentangeli, who's the guy who kills himself at the end, was a character created for what was originally Clemenzo's role in the story, which makes so much sense that now that I know that, right? But because Clemenzo's such a major character in the first film, and it's clearly a role that just comes out of nowhere, and it clearly could have been Clemenzo. But Richard S. Castellano declined to return. He played Clemenzo, as he and the producers could not reach an agreement on his demands that he be allowed to write his character's dialogue.
The fuck?
What the fuck? Why would you even want that? What is that? What kind of perk is that? That's so weird.
It was they'd had the improvising stuff, and he's like, "Fuck, I'm real good at this."
And it's disappointing though, because I liked Frankie as a character, but I think it would have been a lot more powerful with Clemenzo. Like seeing a character we've already grown attached to through these tragic beats, and just like Fredo, it feels like him killing himself would have hit home just as hard as it did with Fredo getting shot out on the lake, right? And I'm like, as soon as I read that, I was like, damn, that would have been so good if it was Clemenzo. Clemenzo's in the flashbacks. He's one of Robert De Niro's Vito's friends. And he's always eating because he gets real fat by the time he's an old man.
It's Clemenza, by the way.
It's spelled Clemenzo.
I mean, it's got an A at the end of it, but yeah.
It's not. Well, I don't know. Everywhere I've copied this from.
That's actually
directly.
It's 100% Clemenza, and
maybe
it's
I
spelled with an
screwed
A,
up then.
But yeah.
So initial reviews of The Godfather 2 were mixed, as I said. People found it confusing, poorly paced, unnecessary, though as stated, it soon became the subject to critical reevaluation. To quote whoever wrote this on Wikipedia, many critics compare it favourably with the original, although it is rarely ranked higher on the list of the greatest films. So everyone's like, you hear people be like, the second part's even better, but you never see it. You never see in these lists it get ranked higher, you know. Roger Ebert, going back to what he thought of the film, he awarded it 3 stars out of 4 and wrote that the flashbacks give Coppola the greatest difficulty in maintaining his pace and narrative force. The story of Michael, told chronologically and without the other material, would have had really substantial impact, but Coppola prevents our complete involvement by breaking the tension. Though praising Pacino's performance and lauding Coppola as a master of mood, atmosphere, and period, Ebert considered the chronological shifts of its narrative a structural weakness from which the film never recovers. So
that's interesting. I can definitely see. I mean, I haven't seen trailers or whatever for this film, but if you didn't know that this was coming, really, like you're just, there's a new Godfather, I can't wait to see what Michael happens, and then it's like you have to keep pausing the film to see this other thing, and it's like, well, we already know how this story ends, because like prequels weren't really still now aren't very commonly done, no. And so the idea of like, why am I seeing this when I know what happens to him, this and where I want to see this, I can imagine that would be incredibly jarring for an audience at the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's Gene Siskel, so Roger Ebert's like partner in crime, gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, writing that it was at times as beautiful, as harrowing, and as exciting as the original. In fact, The Godfather Part 2 may be the second best gangster movie ever made. Wow. But it's not the same, and sequels can never be the same. It's like being forced to go to a funeral the second time. The tears just don't flow as easily. But Ebert would later recant and retrospectively awarded it a full 4 stars in a second review, and inducted the film into his great movies section, praising the work as grippingly written, directed with confidence and artistry, photographed by Gordon Willis, the cinematographer, in rich, warm tones, which makes me want to talk about the color palette before we move on, because I really like when films in a franchise are kind of signified by like a dominant color. Like, the best thing about Godzilla King of the Monsters, that it was like a blue movie compared to the first Godzilla's red movie, right? Yeah. I really like that. And this film is filmed in almost sepia for a lot of it. Like, it's very warm. It's a very warm-looking film, whereas the first one is a lot more desaturated and things like that. And did you like the color palette? It certainly gives the film its own identity.
Yeah, I did. I think it's cool, and it's one of those things where you can see just a still from the film and know what it is.
Yeah. So it's good. All right, dumb IMDb trivia, Richard. So I've got 2 pieces here which aren't dumb by themselves, but together, it's like, why was this? They were right next to each other on IMDb trivia. Francis Ford Coppola, having nearly been fired several times from the first film, was given a Mercedes-Benz limousine from Paramount Pictures as a reward for the record success of The Godfather, and an incentive to direct a sequel. He agreed on several conditions: that the sequel be interconnected with the first film with the intention of later showing them together, that he be allowed to direct his own script of The Conversation, and that he be allowed to direct a production of the San Francisco Opera, and that he would be allowed to write the screenplay for The Great Gatsby, all prior to production of the sequel for a Christmas 1974 release. So that was what he negotiated. The next piece of trivia says Francis Ford Coppola had a horrible time directing The Godfather and asked to pick a different director for the sequel while taking the title of producer for himself. He chose Martin Scorsese, who the film executives rejected. Thus, Coppola agreed to direct the film with a few conditions. And those few conditions, to reiterate, were like, I've just read just combine them into one piece of trivia. Yeah. That's one piece of trivia that's needlessly separated.
That's so funny.
Merle Johnson, who played Troy Donahue, but his real name is Merle Johnson. So Merle Johnson was played by a guy named Troy Donahue, but Troy Donahue's real name is Merle Johnson. This is Connie's new husband at the start of the film. According to Francis Ford Coppola on the DVD commentary, G.D. Spradlin wrote many of his own lines, including his anti-Italian speech to Michael. So he plays Senator Geary in the film. And it's like, why was he allowed to write his own dialogue and Clemenza wasn't? Why am I reading this now? Only Best Picture winner with a Roman numeral in its title. It's like it's so many other things than just being the first one. It's the first sequel.
This was also the first American film to use a number to denote the sequel.
I had that talked about in we talk about titles section, but we can talk about it now. Is that this is pretty important to the history of titles as we talk about, because part 2 is as you say, is the first time that the numerical sequel was used in America. Paramount was initially opposed to this because they believed the audience would not be interested in an addition to a story that had already been seen. But the director prevailed, and the film's success began the common practice of numbered sequels. So as you can imagine, I'm sure, Richard, I read that piece of trivia 100 times in researching this film, right? And it's funny, every time it's like they didn't want to use part 2 because that implies you're watching the same movie again. And it's like, that is the opposite school of thought now. Yeah. Now it's like you have to use the same title, basically, because it's a brand loyalty thing.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to see how different the beliefs once were.
Yeah, but it's interesting because the first sequel was The Fall of a Nation which was a sequel to The Birth of a Nation, which is a great sequel title to a horribly racist film. But the titling, man, those racists, they know their titles.
After this is the last piece of dumb IMDb trivia for part 2. After Michael finds out Fredo was the traitor, Fredo protests and says that he didn't know it was going to be a hit. But the tip off to Michael that he was going to be hit and that saved his life was when Kay asked him why the bedroom drapes were open, which gave Michael the split second he needed to take cover and save their lives. Since the traitor had to be the one to leave the drapes open, and the only possible reason to leave the drapes open was to give the assassin a clear shot where Michael was visible in the bedroom, Fredo had to know it was going to be a hit. It's like this. What are you talking about?
It's like
I'm so.
It's like the thing the character works out in the film.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
It's like, oh, very clever. You've certainly, this is all absolutely subtext, And they've written,
yeah. So someone was watching the film and with that person and was like, why did he notice? Like, I don't get why the drape's being open. But and he panicked, and then they were able to explain why. And they're like, well, maybe a lot of people are having this trouble with the film.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Richard. So, any more thoughts on Godfather Part 2 before we move on?
Nah. It's good. You should check it out.
You should check it out. We should start saying that in every episode after we finish talking about each film.
Yeah.
The Godfather Part 3, 16 years later in 1990, Francis Ford Coppola returned. What do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
I know it's still fresh, despite being it's around like 70.
68.
Wow.
So it's exactly 30 points less.
I was 2 off for all of my guesses.
There you go. Wow, very, very poetic. What are you, Francis Ford Coppola and screenwriter Mario Puzo? So yeah, definitively the Fredo of the trilogy, The Godfather Part 3.
Very funny.
I didn't make that up. That's said a lot over in Godfather discourse. I cannot take credit for this. What is The Godfather Part 3 about?
So this is about, well, it's really about the death of Michael Corleone. It's set much later. It revolves around the real life death of the Pope in 1978. And the papal banking scandal of 1981 to 1982. Yeah, this is like an aging Michael Corleone who's supposed to be about 60. I think Pacino was 50 at the time. And yeah, it's like his kids are growing up, and it's a lot more like religious. It's about his involvement in the Catholic Church. Again, this is another like kind of active watch one, which is maybe harder to stay active with because the film isn't as good. I do want to talk about one thing, but I just want to barrel straight into my complaints.
Okay.
My biggest complaint about this film is something I have never noticed in another film. I've never thought to mention in another film. The worst thing about this film is Michael's haircut is so wrong for the character. It's like, it's unfathomably bad. Like, he's got this sporty young man's like spiky hairdo, and it's supposed to be like, you're supposed to be making Al Pacino look 10 years older than he is, and you give him like a really stylish haircut that looks like, oh, he's a bit of a silver fox. And it's like, what are you doing? It's insane. It's the wrong haircut.
Yeah. I agree. I think that it's I'm not sure where I crack this nut open now. If I prematurely nut, Richard, I don't know if I should. But I agree. It was the first thing that stood out to me, and I think his hair being different from Michael Corleone's usual slicked back hair is something that that is indicative of a larger problem with the film, which is Al Pacino's acting toolset changed completely between part 1 and part 2 and part 3, right?
And like his voice and everything, he became known for like, rather than these deep, complex characters, he became known for like, hoo-ah!
Yeah, he became hoo-ah Pacino. And while I don't think The Godfather Part 3, I don't think he's bad.
Oh no, it's still a great performance. Don't get me wrong.
But it still feels like I'm watching Al Pacino rather than Michael Corleone. And a big visual indicator of that is
his hair.
And
it is, just talking more broadly about the film, it's funny because once again, you and I have we grew up in a world where we were born into a world where there was 3 Godfather movies and the third one is bad. Like, that's a universally accepted fact from the time we were born. But I don't think I knew the release dates of them, but I never really like put together how big of the gap it was. I was trying to think about, like, give an example. So a film that came out in 1972 and then had a sequel in 1974 and then had a sequel in 1990, that would be like a 2020 sequel to a 2002 film, which was followed by 2004, which actually, if Spider-Man 3 had just come out this year, because 1 and 2, 2002, 2004, and the third one was disappointing. Like, it's actually like almost a perfect comparison for the superhero genre.
Yeah, actually, that's true. And I didn't realize that either. I didn't realize the time was as you said, essentially the same experience as you had. I knew The Godfather 3 came out in 1990. I think what I actually thought was The Godfather 2 came out in between.
Right.
I was more shocked to see The Godfather 2 came out in 1974 than The Godfather 3 being so much later.
Yeah, I knew it was 72, 74, and 90, but I just never sat and thought about like, fuck, that's ages. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see how this is the weakest of the trilogy. I don't think it's terrible, but it's bad enough that it's a disappointing finale, and it stops me from regarding The Godfather as the greatest trilogy of all time. It's not the greatest trilogy. Lord of the Rings is a better trilogy than The Godfather.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it is. It's not a bad movie, but it's like you're literally having to trying to compare it to two of the greatest films ever made.
Right, 16 years later. Yeah. That's where the death blow is that part 2 struck while the part 1 iron was hot, right? Yeah. And by 1990, the Godfather duology had been well established as like the unbeatable nexus of American cinema, right? Like this is it. And then 16 years later, it's 1990, you make a sequel. It's like, well, obviously this is not going to do well. Even just aesthetically, part 3 is clearly shot in a different era of filmmaking, and this is off-putting. The first 2 films feel like old Hollywood classics, while part 3 is very much a 90s film.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah, I didn't hate it, but it's bad enough to be like, you could have done better. You know what I mean? Yeah. Sofia Coppola, who plays Mary Corleone in this film, Michael's daughter, is unfortunately pretty fucking bad in this movie. She delivers a terrible performance. And while I thought that Andy Garcia, who plays Vincent, who becomes the new Don towards the end of the film, he delivered one of the better performances in the film, I don't understand why there needed to be a cousin-on-cousin romance between Sofia Coppola's character and Andy Garcia's character. Like, they are cousins and they get together, and it's mentioned once or twice in the film that they're first cousins, but it's not really regarded as out of the ordinary.
Well, yeah, because Pacino says you're first cousins, and she says, then I'll love him first.
Yeah, which is like, okay, and he's like, that's fine. It's the conflict comes from more Vincent's want to be a gangster. Is to like, Michael's like, well, you can't be with my daughter then because you want in on this life.
Yeah.
And it's not, you can't be with my daughter because you're fucking first cousins. That's never brought up. And digging into why Francis Ford Coppola chose to film scenes of his daughter making out with her character's cousin is the kind of Freudian rabbit hole I was worried I was going to have to fall into here. But it turns out that Sofia Coppola's casting was just one of the many omens which troubled this entire production. Like, this is one of those things where you read everything that went wrong before filming started, and you're like, this is not gonna match the first 2. You know, this is not going to create the greatest trilogy of all time.
It is funny as well because so Sofia Coppola is playing and having a romance with her cousin, but she also, Talia Shire, who's been in all 3 of these movies, as Connie, is actually Sofia Coppola's aunt because she's Francis Ford Coppola's sister.
Yeah. So first, to go through these omens and just give you guys an idea, and you, Richard, if you don't know, of all the bullshit that, you know, the stars which aligned and the forces of fate that clearly didn't want this film to be made. Let's go through a few of them now. So first of all, Coppola didn't even want to make a third part. You stop there. You stop there, Paramount, right? Like, one of the greatest directors of all time, made 2 of the greatest films of all time, doesn't want to do it. Maybe don't do it. And he stated that only dire financial situations caused by the failure of his film One from the Heart in 1982 compelled him to take up Paramount's long-standing offer to make a third installment. Coppola and Puzo preferred the title The Death of Michael Corleone. But Paramount Pictures found that unacceptable. The general idea you'll see repeated over and over again by Coppola and his defenders is that it was less part 3 and more of an epilogue, and calling it part 3 implies it's the definitive third chapter. You know, it's not supposed to be part 3, it's supposed to be its own thing. I understand what he means. I don't think I agree. It is still the third story in the series.
Yeah.
And it's even if it was called The Death of Michael Corleone, which I don't think is a very good title, I don't think it would change.
I think it would be a good title if it was like Mario Puzo's The Godfather Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone. Like, I think that's probably a better title. I just came up with that myself, yeah.
If only. Robert Duvall is notably absent from this film. His character is not in it. Notably, yeah. He refused to take part unless he was paid a salary comparable to Pacino's. When Duvall dropped out, Coppola rewrote the screenplay to portray Tom Hagen, who is Robert Duvall's character, as having died before the story begins, and created the character of B.J. Harrison, played by George Hamilton, to replace Hagen's character in the story. Do you remember B.J. Harrison in The Godfather Part 3?
Yes.
I don't. I have no memory of this character, so clearly the role was also, Yeah,
it is interesting because it's like if it feels like had he agreed, this should have been a different film. Like it should have been more about like the fall of the relationship between him and Tommy. Like if the film had been about like the final person in his life that was there for him, betraying him or that relationship ending somehow. Like that, that would have been so much better.
Yeah, and I mean, you're potentially onto something here because Coppola stated that to him, the movie feels incomplete without Duvall's participation. According to Coppola, had Duvall agreed to take part in the film, the Hagen character would have been heavily involved in running Corleone's charities. Duvall confirmed in 2010 that he never regretted the decision of turning down the role. Because we haven't really mentioned this yet, but this film is about Michael wanting to be legitimate and wanting, he's very clearly racked with guilt and wanting to make the Corleone family.
The guilt over Fredo's death is a huge through line of it. But yeah, it's interesting because Duvall said he's never regretted it, but it's like, of course you're like, oh fuck, I managed to get out and not do the shit one, but it's like it might not have been shit if you were in it. Not that it's shit, but that's the general consensus of it.
I think it's shit enough to call it shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're talking the difference between...
Well, but I know people are going to come and be like, the third one's actually not that bad. But it's like, so, and it isn't.
Yeah, but you should judge a franchise based on what the best one is, right? Yeah. And a 30% Rotten Tomatoes drop in any franchise is bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So... Julia Roberts, Madonna, Rebecca Schaeffer, and famously Winona Ryder up until the day of shooting were all in the running to play Mary Corleone, but they all either dropped out of the race or dropped out of the film, were rejected, or murdered. Do you know about Rebecca Schaeffer?
Yeah.
Murdered. That's crazy. That sucks.
Getting murdered? That's like getting murdered. That would fucking suck.
As soon as I said that, I was like, you are understating murder, AJ. That's crazy. I'd never heard about that before, and I fell into a little rabbit hole that...
Yeah, it was killed by an obsessed fan, eh?
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, that sucks, man.
That sucks, bro.
Murdered by a stalker? That's so wacky.
So Winona Ryder was very close to playing Mary Corleone, but dropped out the day before shooting, as I said, because she fainted and was diagnosed with exhaustion. There are some conspiracy theories that Johnny Depp, who was her boyfriend at the time, convinced her to do it, and she was in Edward Scissorhands around the same time. I don't know, but ultimately Sofia Coppola, the director's daughter, was given the role of Michael Corleone's daughter, and her much criticised performance resulted in her father being accused of nepotism, which, as Coppola and many people have pointed out, has kind of a touch of irony to it, considering the film ends with a shot meant for Michael hitting and killing Mary. So it's in both real life and in the film, the daughter pays the price for the father's sins.
Yeah, I watching the film and knowing that it was she was put into the role at the last second, and is not a strong actor, probably by her own admission.
Fantastic director, right? So it's whatever.
Yeah, she's got her own thing going. She's I overwhelming. My feeling was just that I felt really sorry for her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's she's gonna be getting all this hate her entire life, and it's I didn't want this, and she had a day to prepare.
Yeah. It sucks, man. That sucks. That's as bad as getting murdered. Yeah. So, and it's so, God, it's such a shame, and I feel real bad for her. But that little parallel, that the daughter paying the price for the father's sins, might be the best thing about the film on like a holistic viewing of it, right? So Roger Ebert, going back to him, he stated that it is not even possible to understand this film without knowing the first two, which does go against Coppola's insistence that this is an epilogue. It's like, well, it's not a very good epilogue, is it, if it's
Yeah.
So intrinsically tied. Nonetheless, Ebert wrote an enthusiastic review. He gave it 3.5 stars, which was what he gave The Godfather Part 2 before his reevaluation. And he defended Sofia Coppola and said there is no way to predict what kind of performance Francis Ford Coppola might have obtained from Winona Ryder, the experienced and talented young actress who was originally set to play this role, but I think Sofia Coppola brings a quality of her own to Mary Corleone, a certain upfront vulnerability and simplicity that I think are appropriate and right for the role. Gene Siskel seemed to politely disagree with this defense of Sofia Coppola, and he said she was out of her league. She's supposed to be Andy Garcia's love interest, but no sparks fly. He's more like her babysitter. Yeah, Gene Siskel. He's also more like her first cousin. Leonard Maltin, giving the film 3 out of 4 stars, stated that the film is masterfully told, but the casting of Sofia Coppola is an almost fatal flaw. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean,
is it a fatal flaw?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like it's supposed to be like the heart of the film, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not a beating heart.
Yeah. Yeah, and I saw some other people talking about the film, like, at the time. I saw one review saying, like, it is unforgivably bad, which, again, it's bad enough that it's a disappointment. I don't know if it's unforgivingly bad. And I also saw another thing saying that, like, in most cases, sequels are optional. Like, you didn't have to make The Godfather 2. It's an option. But The Godfather Part 3 is an inevitability. And the place, I agree. I think where The Godfather Part 2 ends, I don't think the story's over, personally. I want to see more.
I want to see the death of Michael Corleone, which we see in this film, and I didn't like.
Walk us through what happens.
So the film, like we said, like you mentioned, that she
Mary
ends
gets
up
shot,
taking a bullet, and she
falls to her knees. Falls to her knees and looks up at Al Pacino, the greatest actor of a generation, Al Pacino, and goes, "Dad." It's so bad. It's such a it's you remember Marion Cotillard in The Dark Knight Rises died? It's like, along with that, is one of the worst acted death scenes I think I've ever seen.
But yeah, and Pacino's like, his grief is like, I would have loved to see 1974 Al Pacino react to this death rather than like, when he screams, he goes, "Hoo-ah!"
He just screams, "Hoo-ah!" And he's like, "She had a great ass!" Because this family is clearly okay with incest.
And then it just like, again, we get like a fade. It goes to a montage of him with Kay and his first wife. And then it just cuts to years later. He's got old man makeup on, and then he just slumps over in his chair and dies.
Drops an orange, which is a symbol of death across the whole.
But it's like, it's I don't know. It's supposed to be this poetic thing.
Wait, does he fucking drop an orange? Maybe he doesn't.
I don't remember the orange dropping.
There's a lot of oranges.
He has a hat on.
Right.
But yeah, I thought it was unsatisfying a little bit, and seeing old man makeup on Al Pacino, it wasn't as good as like the Brando makeup.
I'll say this: I think that it is, when you're talking about the concept of the death of Michael Corleone, and you're like imagining this tragedy, I think it is tragic that he lives a full life while everyone around him dies.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong. I like the idea. I just didn't like the way it was played out.
Right. So part 3 was actually nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Andy Garcia, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Art Direction and Set Direction, Best Music, and Best Music. But it is the only film in the series to not have Al Pacino nominated, and it was the only film in the trilogy to not win Best Picture. Dances with Wolves won Best Picture that year, if you're interested.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't win any of the Academy Awards, as well as being
Got
the
American
only film
Hustled.
in the trilogy. Huh?
Got American Hustled.
Right, there you go. No, American Hustle got Godfather Part 3, dude. It didn't win any award, and as well as the only film in the trilogy not selected for preservation by the US National Film Registry. A pretty... that's a blow. That says everything, I think. So it didn't win any Oscars, but it did win a couple of Golden Raspberry Awards. Both for Sofia Coppola, Worst Supporting Actress and Worst New Star. So when you go on the Wikipedia pages for these movies, and you go down to awards, the first two, it's like all the Oscars at one, and then the third one, it's all the Raspberries at one. Which has a certain poetry to it.
A certain je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, as the Italians say, je ne sais quoi. I actually thought about looking up what je ne sais quoi is in Italian, or what I don't know what is in Italian.
It has a certain mamma mia.
It has a certain mamma mia. I'm going to look it up. I don't know what in Italian. How to say I don't know in Italian. Non lo so. It has a certain non lo so. There we go. Okay. According to IMDb, Robert De Niro lobbied for the role of Vincent Mancini. Francis Ford Coppola considered it, which would have included aging Al Pacino's character, or Al Pacino's Michael Corleone, even more for Vincent and Mary to be of similar ages, but eventually decided against the idea. But I do think that is a pretty fucking interesting piece of trivia.
I missed who you said, the actor.
Oh, Robert De Niro.
Right.
So he would have played a young Vito and so Vincent is Sonny's son, illegitimate son.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's credence to that idea. I don't know if it's a bad idea, but there you go. And similar to, but maybe not as surprising, similar to when I said that keep your friends closer and your enemies closer is from The Godfather 2, possibly. The Godfather 3 is
actually where hoo-ah comes from.
Yeah, it's from where hoo-ah is from. No, it's where just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in is from, which I knew was from a movie, but it's funny that we talked about how like you passively ingest so much of The Godfather 1 and none of or barely any of The Godfather 2. I didn't think I knew anything about The Godfather 3, but I knew that line, so there you go.
Yeah, like I hadn't even seen his haircut.
Yeah.
Like it was a shock to me when I started the film. I have these 3 movies on DVD, and they're like it's like it was clearly, they re-released all of them. It was like a 4K re-release, even though it's on DVD, so it's only like 480. But it's there's a shot on each of them that has like the lead actor of each film, and on the second film, I cannot tell if it's a picture of Robert De Niro or Al Pacino.
I know what you mean. I thought so too. What are some things you like about The Godfather Part 3? Is there anything specific you want to be like, I know I've trash talked it, but I did enjoy this moment, or I did enjoy this part?
I know I did have some while watching it, but I cannot remember them.
I liked when they go to Sicily and Anthony sings the Godfather theme song in opera, because he becomes an operatic performer. And that felt like kind of the like metatextual, I don't know, I enjoyed that he sings the Godfather theme tune. I thought that was cool. And it has quite a profound effect on Michael as well, because it reminds him of his first wife who was killed in Sicily in the first film.
Because he remembers the music from the first film.
Yeah. All right, I've got a couple of pieces of dumb IMDb trivia for The Godfather Part 3 before we can move on to continue the franchise towards the end of the show.
Wow.
So, here is the dumb IMDb trivia. Al Pacino was offered $5 million but wanted $7 million plus a percentage of the gross to reprise his role as Michael. Francis Ford Coppola refused and threatened to rewrite the script by starting off with Michael's funeral sequence instead of the film's introduction. Pacino agreed to the $5 million offer. Do you know how many stories I've read that are about actors angrily negotiating things to be in the sequels? And it's like, did Pacino and Coppola even fucking like each other? This sounds like friendship ruining like disagreements, you know? He threatened to rewrite the film. And it's like, I wonder if it is just business and it's just their agents yelling back at each other. But it seems crazy that like you'd agree to work with who I would imagine, before reading any of this, would be quite a rewarding
Who
partnership.
I would imagine.
Who I? Francis Ford Coppola was interested in making Michael Corleone pay for his sins in the third chapter.
Did he do it?
Wow, very cool. 3 years before the film was released, the title was used for an episode of Cheers. There's an episode of Cheers called The Godfather, Part 3, which similar thing happened with Malcolm in the Middle. There's an episode of Malcolm in the Middle called Home Alone 4, which came out before Home Alone 4.
There's also an episode of Spin City called Back to the Future Part 4.
Wow. Hopefully.
Because Christopher Lloyd guest stars in it.
Right. There you go. Maybe that'll mean sometime in the future. We'll get Back to the Future 4. Now we're going to move on to the final segment of the show, or the final real segment of the show. There's a couple of...
Yeah, we got these fucking dumb other ones.
But this is Continue the Franchise, where we each pitch a continuation of the franchise. But before we do that, we're going to discuss some, you know, the various non-film or future connections that The Godfather has to more content coming out. And this is a pretty chock-a-block list. So let's discuss the most immediate continuations of The Godfather. Coppola stated that the idea of a fourth film was discussed, but Mario Puzo died before they were able to write the film. A potential script. Yeah, it sucks. It would suck. It would suck. A potential script told in a similar narrative to Part 2 would have included De Niro reprising his role as a younger Vito Corleone in the 1930s. Leonardo DiCaprio was slated to portray a young Santino Corleone, so Sonny, gaining the Corleone's family's political power, and Andy Garcia reprising his role as Vincent during the 1980s, running the family business through a 10-year destructive war, haunted by the death of his cousin Mary, and eventually losing the family's respect and power. Garcia has since claimed the film's script was nearly produced. Not a bad sounding film. It does feel like the dead horse is being beaten a bit too much by this point.
It's insane to think that like there would be a fourth part, you know?
Yeah. But I do like the idea of a DiCaprio playing a young Sonny, and I do like it. It's a good idea. It's not a bad idea, you know.
Yeah.
There's legs on it. In September 2020, we talked about this recently, for the film's 30th anniversary, it was announced that a new cut of The Godfather Part 3 was being edited. It will be titled Mario Puzo's The Godfather, Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone. It will have a limited theatrical release in December, followed by a digital release. He got there in the end. Yay, well done, Coppola.
It'll be interesting to see, like, I wonder if there's just all these unused takes of Sophia Coppola that are amazing.
Yeah. What is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, is it salvageable?
That's the question, isn't it? Like, what are we looking at here?
But it would be interesting because of you look at how much better reviewed Part 2 was with time. I wonder if people are ready to be like, the third one's pretty good, and a better cut is going to, when it gets released, people are going to see it and be like, this is actually pretty good, you know?
Yeah, and if I hadn't read his reasoning for wanting to call it that, I would have complained that if your sequel is called Part 2, you are contractually obligated to make the next one called Part 3. But if it is, as he says, kind of envisioned as a different beast altogether, I can maybe get behind The Godfather Coda. It's just a clunky, look at that.
I can't.
There's 4 sections of the title. A title should never have more than 3 sections.
Yeah.
This is Mario Puzo, The Godfather, Coda, The death of Michael Corleone. Now, in terms of other sequels and continuations, it might be interesting to look at Mario Puzo's Godfather novels and its sequels, which were written by Mark Weingartner and Ed Falco. These include The Sicilian in 1984, written by Puzo, and The Godfather Returns in 2004, and The Godfather's Revenge in 2006, which were by Weingartner, and The Family Corleone by Falco in 2012. Mario Puzo also wrote a couple more novels which were very similar but not explicitly related to the Godfather canon, including The Last Don in 1996 and Omerta in 2000. So there's that.
Yeah.
And speaking of his novels, Mario Puzo's The Sicilian, which is a sequel to the Godfather novel, was actually adapted into film in 1987 and was directed by man who sold his soul for one chance at making a great movie, Michael Cimino, so the Deer Hunter director, who went on, as you said, to only direct Critical Abomination so bad it caused a lot of critics to actually reassess their praise for the Deer Hunter, which is one of my favorite tidbits in Hollywood. It's your career being so bad that people go, man, was the one thing you made actually that good?
Yeah.
The Sicilian...
That's pretty interesting. It's also Mario Puzo. I just found this out that the only other kind of major noteworthy films he wrote were Superman 1 and 2.
Oh wow, that's awesome. There you go. The Sicilian, the film, is included in this repertoire of not very good films that Cimino made after The Deer Hunter. It was torn apart by critics and is generally accepted as to be definitively not part of the Godfather film canon. So we didn't miss a film or anything.
Yeah, and also it completely it was rewritten to not.
Yeah.
All the characters all have different names and whatnot. But.
Yeah. So the first two Godfather films were edited into a 4-episode TV miniseries in 1977 called The Godfather Saga, which included a couple of additional scenes and a couple of subtracted scenes. A new version was made in 1992 after the release of the third film called The Godfather Trilogy, 1901 to 1980. There have also been 3 video games based on the series, a side-scroller in 1991 called The Godfather, released on the Amiga, the Atari ST, and MS-DOS, and 2 open-world shooters based on the first 2 films released in 2009 and 2006 and 2009, respectively, for PC and then Xbox 360, and then PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, which I've seen a lot of footage from a channel I watch called Mini-Me, and it's pretty funny. You can make you design your own character in the Godfather 2 PlayStation 3 game, and so the Mini-Me, the YouTuber, he made his character look like Colonel Sanders, and he's just running around as Colonel Sanders in the Godfather Part 2 storyline. I believe the first game, you take the role of a character who is in the place of a character who's in the film, but they replace him with I can't remember who it is, but yeah. So I don't think they're particularly revered PlayStation games, but it interests me that they exist.
Yeah.
that Godfather games were made. I think that's pretty funny. So there is enough extra media for The Godfather I thought, when looking all this up, to run a pretty comprehensive Godfather-based podcast where you cover one piece of media per episode. And then I wrote, wait, that's my Continue the Franchise. As a podcast where you do the first 3 episodes are on the first 3 films, and then you do The Sicilian, and then you read a novel, and then you do the video games. There's so much that you could go for quite a few episodes before running out of media to mine from.
Nice. I like that.
So that's my Continue the Franchise as a podcast. I was thinking of a title for it. It could be called An Offer We Couldn't Refuse.
Nice. It's interesting. That's the first time we've referenced that line of dialogue in an over 2-hour podcast. I thought about it an hour ago, and I was like, that's funny. I wonder if I might bring that up at the end. But yeah, there you go.
Well, it was brought up at the end.
Yep. I couldn't refuse it.
I wouldn't let you.
Anyway, my Continue the Franchise is just try the third one again. Everyone's still alive. Al Pacino,
right.
It's make it now that he's he is actually fucking old. And he's got old people here, and to get I don't know, not Winona Ryder necessarily, but get someone else to play Sofia Coppola. Like, it's an idea that's not rotten to the core, but, you know, or you could do de-aging technology on Al Pacino. I think it works on him. I thought he looked the best in The Irishman.
Yeah. So you're pitching Terminator Dark Fating, the Godfather series.
Yes,
ignoring everything after the second one. That's a good idea, Richard. You know who'd be a good Mary Corleone?
Who?
Saoirse Ronan.
Oh, shit.
She looks Italian-American.
Yeah, are there any Italian-American actresses?
No, I only want to cast Irish. I mean, Irish and Italian-American are both, you know, mobby.
They both start with I.
Yeah.
Madonna?
Well, Madonna was originally rejected because she was too old.
Yeah. Well, now she's probably all right.
I mean, I think the reason it won't
Alexandra
happen,
Daddario?
I don't think she's a good enough actress. Does she?
Lady
you
Gaga?
want someone. You want to cast someone who will win an Oscar for their role as Mary
Lady
Corleone.
Gaga?
Yeah, Lady Gaga.
Linda Cardellini?
I don't know if she fits the part. I was going to say that you say no one's died. Mario Puzo has died, and I think Coppola
it's like
probably doesn't want to do it.
Him kind of thing.
Yeah, but also Coppola's still alive. But maybe in an ultimate show of like parallel between the films and the real life, maybe Sofia Coppola directs The Godfather Part 3.
Yeah.
Redux, you know?
Starring Bill Murray as...
Yeah, now I was like, Sofia Coppola's a very different director to Francis Ford Coppola, though. So maybe this wouldn't be as... but yeah, I think... that's a good idea. I wonder why they haven't done that. Maybe because this trend is a relatively new thing of...
Yeah.
But yeah. No, that's a good idea.
Thank you.
No, you know what he'd fucking call it, though?
What?
He'd call it The Death of Michael Corleone. Nothing can stop him now.
Yeah. What about
awesome?
He just gets Gia Coppola to play it, who's like his granddaughter.
Isn't she directing a film?
I think so. Yeah. Mainstream.
That's the name of the film.
Yeah.
Just describing her. Cool. Okay, so Richard, now it's just time to rank that franchise. Do you want to do the honors?
Of ranking?
Mm.
Yeah, so we have a list of every franchise we've ever watched. Well, almost every franchise we've ever watched.
Oh, yeah. Fun fact, we never ranked a Cinderella Story. For some reason, that got skipped when we ranked the franchise in the franchise ranking episode we did last year, which is not only like, oh, that's a bummer, but all year long we've been saying, this is arguably our 100th franchise. It's like, this means that James Bond was definitively not our 100th franchise, you know? Our 100th franchise was just the Santa Claus.
Also, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the 200th episode of the podcast, and we didn't mention it.
Man, we're better. We're coming up on our 500th film watched for Film Franchise Fortnights as well.
Do we want to add a Cinderella Story now?
Yeah, let's add a Cinderella Story and just real quickly rank it.
Cool. Cinderella Story, they weren't very good, so I think they can be better or worse than Bring It On.
Better than Bring It On.
You reckon?
We just have this big argument. where is Bring It On the list?
104. I'm gonna put. I think it's like the best Cinderella Story isn't as good as the best Bring It On.
But the sequel, fuck, dude, the sequels to Bring It On are so bad.
So the ones just. Oh no, actually, we kind of did have a bit of
the sequels to Cinderella Story are better than a Cinderella Story.
Okay, I'm putting a Cinderella Story at 100 because I think it's poetic. So it's one better than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Wow,
but it's not as good as Cats and Dogs.
And it's better than Yu-Gi-Oh.
I'm gonna swap Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Cats and Dogs.
Okay.
Okay,
we're
so
just
now
crazy.
99. 99 is TMNT, 100 is Cinderella Story, 101 is Cats and Dogs, 102 is Yu-Gi-Oh! Okay, now to move those all down a place, presumably, by adding The Godfather.
Yeah. We've talked about, like, it's potential that, like, people have discovered this podcast because it's like, oh, I love The Godfather. I'm a classy film buff.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love
And they're
The
like, why are
I'm
they
gonna listen
fucking
to this-
talking about a Cinderella story?
all class has just immediately been sucked out of this episode.
Yeah. All right. I'm going pretty high with The Godfather. It's currently at 115. And I feel comfortable moving it up from there.
I think so.
I've put it
maybe-
somewhere. I want to see if you agree with me.
Okay, so for context, our current top 10 franchises we ever watched at 10, going down is, from 10 to 1, at 10 is Mad Max, then Monsters Inc., then Shrek, then Lord of the Rings, then Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, then Iron Man, then
the MCU.
Scream. Oh, the MCU, sorry. Then Scream, Mission Impossible, Back to the Future, Toy Story at number 1. I think this should overtake Shrek.
Interesting. I put it third.
You reckon it's better than Mission Impossible?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. That's like they both have one film that isn't as good as the rest, but I would say Godfather 1 and 2 are better than any Mission Impossible films.
You're right. Fuck, it is. Fuck, that's insane. Which is funny because Lord of the Rings... So Lord of the Rings, I've written this in the notes, that Lord of the Rings is at 7, which is pretty low, but in my opinion, and I think you agree with me.
I completely disagree.
That while The Hobbit shouldn't necessarily be judged in the same section as Lord of the Rings, the fact that they are related is like an anchor tied to the Lord of the Rings. And the Lord of the Rings is good enough that it's still in the top 10, but The Hobbit does drag it down, I think, from where it could be, which is potentially in that top 3 space.
Yeah, I disagree. I think that it's like we're ranking them in a vacuum. But
I think this is in a vacuum.
Yeah, I get what you mean, though, because we do talk about cultural significance, and things like Fast and the Furious is quite high, even though all the films aren't good, but it's like the story of it as a franchise is so fun and interesting.
Exactly.
But also, and same with The Godfather, like the fact that it's like you have 2 of the greatest films ever made, universally agreed upon, and then you followed up 16 years later, and it's like it's poetic, you know.
Yeah.
That the third one isn't as good.
Is this like the earliest distant sequel? It's a very early example of a distant sequel.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the earliest one. Yeah, man, fuck, it is 3, isn't it? Because
Back to the Future, I would say, a lot of people disagree, but I think all 3 of those, well, first one's obviously the best, but 2 and 3 are like on par with each other, more or less. Or the kind of decline. I could listen to an argument that The Godfather could be.
Yeah, I was about to say
that
Back to the Future has been something I've quietly off pod grown to be like, does it really deserve number 2? Because
should we bump it off?
Well, okay. Personally, I always preferred the second Back to the Future. I always thought that was the best one. But I think part of growing up is accepting that the first one is the best one.
Yeah.
And I do think the third one isn't as good as 2 and 1.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about this, and it's like, the reason Back to the Future is in the second spot is actually because I really love each movie individually. But as
they're
a
all
franchise,
doing something different, and they're not just like...
That's super creative, yeah.
Yeah, it's creative.
But as a franchise, maybe it's not actually one I like as a franchise. It's still top 10. I don't think I could say Godfather knocks Toy Story, but I think Godfather might be number 2, dude.
Damn. Let's do it.
Damn. That's crazy.
This is the first time. That's as bad as getting murdered.
This is the first time since doing the ranking the franchise episode that a franchise we've done has broken into the top 10.
Yeah, the highest ones from this year are Terminator and Casino Royale, which are now 12 and 13.
And well, look, while we're re-ranking things, man, we had a conversation at one point months ago about maybe Terminator needs to be reconsidered because it has a good sequel. Or a superior sequel, and most franchises don't.
Yeah.
And so, do we want to re-rank Terminator?
Yeah, fuck it. Let's put it in the top 10.
Where do you think it should go?
Number 1.
So we're at least putting it above Mad Max,
Monsters
which
Inc.
is at 10. Do you reckon the Terminator franchise is better than the Monsters Inc. franchise?
Well, if it's above Monsters Inc., it's not in the top 10 because you're looking at the non-updated list.
Of course. Sorry about that. I refreshed it. It's still not updated.
Yeah, because I haven't saved it. Okay, there you go. Try it now.
I think. Is the real question is Terminator the franchise better than the Shrek series? I think that's the real question here.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think Terminator as a series is better than Lord of the Rings. So that's my definitive.
Okay,
line.
I think it's better than Shrek.
Yeah. Sweet.
Because
while we're here, Richard, no.
Again, it's it's the story of the franchise, and so that's why, because people are going to be like, I imagine that people would look at this list and be like, really, The Godfather? Even though number 3 is shit,
but you're still looking at 2/3 of a franchise being monumentally great, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we did it.
Damn. Well, Richard, all we got left to do now is talk about what our next franchise is going to be, which is going to be airing during Spooktober. So we have asked our Patreon to suggest and vote on a bunch of spooky film franchises for us to cover. For the next one, we're going to do a spooky film franchise suggested by patrons as our next franchise in 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll do a randomly selected franchise roulette of spooky film franchises. And if you want to tell us what won out the vote, Richard, before we do that, I would just like to say that if you enjoyed this podcast, then please consider supporting us on all the different various networks. You can like us on Facebook. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. We have both a video channel for video essays and stuff and a podcast channel, which you could be listening to this episode on. You can also follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us on Letterboxd. All of these places are at Cult Popture. And you can also email us at cultpopturemedia@gmail.com. Join the Cult Popture Discord. Please join the Cult Popture Discord. I need to start saying that up the top of the episode, because that is where the bustling metropolis of the Cult Popture community has really sprung forth. So join the Discord, and you can also support us on Patreon if you like, at patreon.com/cultpopture. Richard, what is the first franchise of Spooktober which we're going to be covering?
It's going to be Blade.
The Blade Trilogy. Okay. I would call them probably more action movies than spooky movies, but this
my fucking god, dude! This whole operation was your idea.
You got so mad that your Google Hangouts busted up in between. It was all I heard was oh my god, dude! Whole operation, your idea.
I just did it again when you were doing it. I think it's this is a fun. If you're going to force us to do a spooky franchise.
Oh, come on. We
I like the idea that it's nah, fuck you, AJ. We're doing one that's mostly an action movie.
Fair enough. All right, well, we will see you
Fair enough.
next.
I will wear that albatross around my neck.
You know what? You're right. And so... Next week, have we planned what we're doing for next week's episode? Yeah, we have, haven't we?
Yes.
Yes. Cool. So that'll also be a spooky themed thing. So tune in for that.
But also if you are sensitive to things being spooky, maybe give the podcast a break for a month. Because you're going to get spooked.
Listening to someone describe a scary movie is as scary as... Cool, so
it's Blade as well, it's not even
there you go. Stay tuned for the post-credit scene after the music stops playing, and thank you for joining us for our 115th franchise, apparently, which is the Godfather Trilogy. Let us know what you thought of the series in any of those ways that I said before.
I would have to double check, but this podcast might be the ratio of films there are versus time to duration of podcast, might be one of the biggest, because it's 2.5 hour podcast for 3 films.
Maybe. Who's to say? They're long films.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Catch you later. Bye.
Peace.
right, welcome to
The Godfather coda.
the podcast post-credit scene. The Podfather. That's been done, hasn't it?
100%.
The Podfather? That's the name of my podcast, Continue the Franchise. Obviously, that's what it's called. The Podfather. Anyway, this is a segment of our show that we do at the end where if you donate $5 or more on our Patreon, you get to give us something to talk about, a question, a challenge, a game to play with each other for these final moments. And today our question comes from Matthew Vose, who's probably got the record for most post-credit scenes at this stage because he sent us a whole bunch of them and we just split them up and scattered them throughout. But this is his last one that he sent us, and it is one of the weirdest and most unanswerable questions I've ever been asked, which is, what's your favourite use of communications technology in film? And it's like, Matthew, I don't know.
Yeah, like we record these in batches usually, and every time we go, all right, have you thought of an answer for Matt's yet? It's like, no, it's been in the back of my mind for so long, and it's like it feels like the kind of thing that, like, Matthew, I would love to know your answer to this because you clearly have one, and we're clearly going to be like, oh, of course that's it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Favorite communications technology in film. So like a piece, something like a futuristic cell phone, like the Star Wars hologram things. I guess that's one.
Yeah. Actually, do you know what my answer is?
I think I've come up with the same one as you.
Okay.
Who goes first on what is the best answer?
I'm really curious, like, how you would have made the same leap.
Because it's from a movie you like more than I like. Not that I dislike it, but you like it more than me.
Okay, say it.
The what do you call it? In Arrival, the aliens in Arrival, how they like write the whole fucking movie's about language and
that's a fucking good answer. It wasn't what I thought of.
They draw like inky circles on the glass, and that's how they communicate. So that is my favorite communications technology.
My answer. It's funny that we both made quite a leap from what we were talking about. You went to, acclaimed director Denis Villeneuve's Oscar, nominated film Arrival. I went to Joel Schumacher's Phone Booth starring Colin Farrell. I love that movie, man, and I probably like it more than you. So I was like, "Fuck, maybe we are thinking of the same movie."
I actually secretly I adore Phone Booth. Like, I'm obsessed with it.
Oh, are you doing a bit? Or
I'm doing a bit. I don't think I've seen Phone Booth.
Oh, it's so good, man.
Should I check it out?
Yeah, it's good. Check it out. Our new catchphrase: get buy our merch. It's just a cool film. It's like it's all in real time, and Kiefer Sutherland voices the bad guy.
Is it animated?
No, it's just he's on the phone.
So wait, is the mode of communication in this film
a phone?
Yeah.
So Colin Farrell's like a New York City douchebag, and he's walking around, and then a phone booth starts ringing, and he answers it, and then he ends up being like trapped in the phone booth essentially, by a sniper, and. Yeah, it's a very tense movie. It's only like 80 minutes. It might be even less than 80 minutes. It's a very easy watch, but I really, really like it. And then they did a spiritual sequel to that called Cellular, starring Chris Evans. Have you seen this?
No, I think my family rented it once.
Yeah. It's like, it's this woman is like kidnapped or something, and they're like, oh, you want to fucking call someone? Here, call someone. They smash a phone. But she manages to like wire it, and like, unable to see what number she's dialing, she's able to just press enough numbers that her phone rings. And Chris Evans picks it up on the other end, and he's just like, "Hey, lady, why'd you call me?" And it's like, you're just a random number. And then she has to keep him on the phone because there's no way that they could get in contact with each other again, and has to find her and save her. But it's like, yeah, in both films, they're stuck to a phone, but in Cellular, he's able to move.
My favourite form of communications technology in film is actually the messenger pigeons from Valkyrie, 2005's Ewan McGregor animated film about pigeons in World War II.
Very cool.
There you go. I think that's what that movie's called. I bet no, it's Valiant. Valkyrie's the Tom
Valkyrie's
Cruise
the Tom
one.
Cruise one in World War II.